James Whitmore III walked through JFK Airport like he owned it. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor, and his $5,000 suit made other travelers stare. He was running late, and everyone would have to deal with it. That's how things had always worked in his world. The girl at the first-class counter dared to ask him to wait while she helped an elderly couple. James rolled his eyes and loudly tapped his phone against the counter. 5 minutes. He had waited 5 whole minutes. Unacceptable. "Do you know who I am?" he snapped, cutting in front of the old couple. "I'm James Whitmore III, and I have a meeting in Leh that's worth more money than you'll see in your lifetime." The counter girl didn't blink. She'd seen his type before. "Sir, I'll be with you shortly." By the time James reached his first-class seat, 3A, window as he always demanded, his face was red with anger. His morning hadn't gone as planned. His driver had hit traffic. His favorite coffee shop had messed up his order. Now this flight delay was the last straw. Flight attendant Michelle Turner noticed him right away. She always noticed the difficult ones. 15 years in the air had given her a sixth sense. As she helped other passengers store their bags, she watched him from the corner of her eye. The way he shoved his briefcase under the seat, how he snapped at the young man who accidentally brushed against him while taking his seat. All warning signs. "Good morning, sir," Michelle said warmly, stopping at his seat. Her smile was genuine, practiced through thousands of flights. "Welcome aboard American Airlines. Can I help you with anything before we take off?" James barely looked up from his phone. "Scotch. Neat. Make it the good stuff, not the garbage you usually serve." "I apologized, sir, but we can't serve alcohol until we're airborne. FAA regulations. I'll be happy to bring it to you as soon as we reach cruising altitude." He finally looked at her then, his eyes cold. "Do you know how much I paid for this ticket?" Michelle had heard this question countless times. She kept her voice steady, professional. "I understand, sir. I'll make sure to bring your drink first once we're in the air." Other first-class passengers were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. A businessman across the aisle shook his head slightly, sympathizing with Michelle. As Michelle moved on to help other passengers, she could hear James complaining loudly on his phone. "This airline is going downhill. The service is terrible. Can't even get a simple drink." The plane began its pushback from the gate. Michelle demonstrated the safety features with her usual grace, even as James loudly sighed and muttered, "Just get on with it." She dealt with difficult passengers before, but something about James Whitmore III felt different. The way his eyes followed her movements, the barely contained anger in his voice, it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. As the plane took off, Michelle watched him grip his armrests. For a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Was it fear? But it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual scowl. Little did either of them know, this routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary. The next few hours would change both their lives forever, and it would all start with a drink order that would spiral into something nobody on Flight AA 347 could have predicted. This was just the beginning, and the real drama was yet to unfold at 35,000 feet above the ground, where there would be nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and nowhere for James Whitmore III to escape the consequences of his actions. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign finally turned off with a soft ding. Michelle knew what was coming. She'd been watching James Whitmore III, checking his watch every 2 minutes, his face getting redder each time. Finally, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some actual service would be nice." Michelle started her drink service, deliberately working her way through first class with practiced efficiency. She could feel James's eyes burning into her back as she served other passengers first. It was standard procedure to work row by row, but she knew he wouldn't see it that way. "I'll have the Macallan 25, James announced when she reached his row, not even waiting for her to speak. He didn't look up from his laptop, just waved his hand dismissively. Michelle took a deep breath. I apologize, sir, but we carry Glenfiddich 15 on this route. It's an excellent. Are you kidding me? James slammed his laptop shut. The elderly woman across the aisle jumped. This is first class. First class. Do you understand what that means? Michelle kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Yes, sir. I can offer you Glenfiddich, Jack Daniels, or what? Some other cheap garbage. His voice was getting louder. A young mother a few rows ahead covered her sleeping baby's ears. I paid $6,000 for this ticket, and you're offering me well drinks like this is some dive bar. A flight attendant named Sarah, working in business class, heard the commotion and peeked through the curtain. Michelle gave her a subtle shake of the head. Not yet. Perhaps I could interest you in our wine selection, Michelle suggested, maintaining her professional smile. We have an excellent California wine. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do I look like I want wine? I asked for Macallan 25. It's not my problem if this second-rate airline can't stock proper liquor. The businessman across the aisle spoke up. Sir, she's just doing her job. Stay out of this, James snapped. He turned back to Michelle. Get me your supervisor. Now. I am the lead flight attendant on this flight. Sir, Michelle replied calmly, though her hands were shaking slightly. She'd been called worse names in her career, dealt with more aggressive passengers, but something about this man's cold anger was different. James stood up suddenly, causing Michelle to step back. He was tall, using his height to try to intimidate her. Well, then maybe you should find another job, one where your incompetence affects fewer people. Other passengers were now openly staring. Someone in row 4 had their phone out, recording. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sir, I need you to lower your voice and take your seat, Michelle said firmly. Her training kicked in. Clear, direct commands. Or what? James stepped closer. His expensive cologne couldn't mask the smell of the drinks he'd had before boarding. You'll throw me off the plane. He laughed again, that same humorless sound. We're at 35,000 feet, sweetheart. You can't do anything. Michelle noticed his hands were clenched into fists. The veins in his neck were bulging. Over 20 years of flying, she learned to read people, to spot the signs of when things were about to go from bad to worse. She was right. In the next few moments, James Whitmore II would cross a line that would change both their lives forever. And as Michelle caught Sarah's eye again, she gave a slight nod. It was time to alert the captain. The storm was about to break, and no one in first class was prepared for what would happen next. As Michelle turned to walk away, everything happened in slow motion. James Whitmore IV's hand shot out like a snake, grabbing her wrist so hard her hand tingled. The drink cart rattled as she bumped into it, ice cubes dancing in their glasses. Don't you dare walk away from me, he hissed. His perfectly manicured nails dug into her dark skin. I'm not finished talking to you. The first-class cabin fell silent. Even the usual hum of the airplane engine seemed muted, as if the whole world was holding its breath. A child in row 5 whispered, Mommy, why is that man being mean? Michelle looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. 20 years of training told her to stay calm, but her heart was pounding against her ribs. Sir, you need to remove your hand. Now. Or what? James's face was inches from hers now. His expensive aftershave couldn't mask the anger rolling off him in waves. You people need to learn your place, always acting like you're better than everyone else, with your attitudes and... Let her go. A deep voice cut through the tension. An older man had stood up, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit marking him as someone important. But James was too far gone to notice the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster under that suit. This is none of your business, James spat, but his grip loosened slightly. Michelle pulled her arm free, stepping back. A red mark loomed on her wrist like an angry bracelet. That's when James made his fatal mistake. He reached for her again, but this time his rage-fueled swing missed as Michelle stepped back. The momentum sent him stumbling forward, knocking over a glass of water that soaked a nearby passenger's expensive laptop. Federal Air Marshal, stand down. The man in the suit moved with surprising speed for his size. Another marshal appeared from business class, both converging on James like well-trained dancers. James's face went from red to white so fast it was almost funny. Wait, I didn't. This is all a misunderstanding. Is it? A woman in row 3 stood up. She pulled out a business card that read Judge Sandra Martinez, Federal Court. Because what I just witnessed was assault on a flight crew member, which is a federal offense carrying up to 20 years in prison. Not to mention the racial elements of your tirade, which could enhance those charges significantly. James started to sweat. His $500 haircut was falling apart as he ran his hands through it. Look, I was just frustrated. She was being difficult about my drink and that justifies putting your hands on her. Another passenger held up their phone. Don't worry, got it all on video, including those charming racial comments. The air marshals had James's hands behind his back now. Someone had given Michelle an ice pack for her wrist. She was filling out an incident report with steady hands, her face professionally blank. Do you know who I am? James's voice cracked. My lawyers will. Your lawyers will what? Judge Martinez interrupted. Explain why you thought it was acceptable to assault a flight attendant because you couldn't get your preferred brand of scotch. I'd love to hear that argument in my courtroom. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security incident, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. James slumped in his seat, the fight draining out of him as reality set in. His phone was buzzing. Probably his office wondering why their star trader was trending on social media. But he wasn't thinking about his job, or his reputation, or even the federal charges waiting for him in Denver. He was thinking about how a simple drink order had just destroyed everything he'd spent his life building. And as the plane began its descent, Michelle Turner straightened her uniform and continued serving drinks to the other passengers, showing James Whitmore III exactly what real class looked like. The plane banked sharply towards Denver International Airport. Red and blue lights were already flashing on the tarmac, waiting like hungry predators. James Whitmore II, now handcuffed and seated between two air marshals, had gone from shouting to begging in record time. Please, he whispered, his designer suit wrinkled and damp with nervous sweat. I have children. A reputation. You don't understand what this will do to me. The older air marshal, whose name tag read Anderson, just stared straight ahead. Should have thought about that before you put your hands on a flight attendant, sir. Phones were still recording. The whole first-class cabin had become an audience to James's downfall. A teenager in row 6 was live-streaming everything, her whispered commentary adding to his humiliation. Oh my God, you guys, the racist businessman is literally crying now. Judge Martinez was on her phone, speaking quietly but firmly. Yes, I want the U.S. Attorney's Office in Denver ready when we land. This is a textbook case of interference with flight crew members. Yes, I witnessed everything. No, this isn't just a minor altercation. Michelle walked past, still performing her duties as if nothing had happened. Only the ice pack on her wrist and slight tremor in her hand showed any sign of the assault. Each time she passed, James tried to catch her eye. Miss Turner, please, he called out. I can make this worth your while. Name your price. I'll donate to any charity you want. Just, please don't press charges. Michelle turned slowly, looking him directly in the eye for the first time. The whole cabin held its breath. My price, Mr. Whitmore. My price is justice, and respect for every flight attendant who's ever been harassed, threatened, or assaulted by passengers who think their money puts them above the law. A scattered applause broke out. Someone whispered, "Damn, that was good." The plane started its final descent. James's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The video had already gone viral. His office was calling. His wife was texting. News outlets were trying to reach him. "Sir," the younger air marshal said, checking his phone, "you might want to know that hashtag first-class felony is trending. Your company's stock is down 3% just in the last hour." James slumped further in his seat. Through the window, he could see the army of police cars waiting. There would be cameras, reporters, more social media. His children would see this. His clients would see this. Everyone would see this. The landing gear touched down with a screech. As the plane taxied to its emergency stop position, a flight attendant named Sarah approached Michelle. "CNN wants an interview. So does FOX. And your union rep is already waiting in the terminal." Michelle nodded, still professional as ever. "Tell them I'll speak to everyone after I've filed my report. This isn't about me. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." The seatbelt sign dinged off one last time. Nobody moved. All eyes were on James as the air marshals stood him up. His legs were shaking so badly they had to hold him steady. "James Whitmore II," Anderson said formally, "you're under arrest for interference with flight crew members and attendants under Title 49, United States Code, Section 46,504. You have the right to remain silent." As they led him towards the exit, James caught a glimpse of his reflection in a window. His $500 haircut was a mess. His Italian silk tie was crooked. His face was streaked with tears he hadn't even realized he'd shed. In just 30 minutes, he'd gone from a powerful Wall Street trader to a viral video cautionary tale. The last thing he heard before being let off the plane was Judge Martinez's voice. "Sometimes, Mr. Whitmore, the most expensive lesson in life is learning that money can't buy you out of consequences." The scene at Denver International Airport looked like something from a movie. Police officers lined the jet bridge as James Whitmore III was marched out, his handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. His face, once proud and arrogant, now looked like a deflated balloon. Camera flashes exploded from every direction. Somehow, the media had already gathered. The perp walk from plane to police car would be tomorrow's front-page news. A reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Mr. Whitmore, any comment on the assault? What about the racial slurs?" James tried to duck his head, but there was nowhere to hide. His phone had finally stopped buzzing, probably because his battery had died. Not that it mattered anymore. His world was falling apart in real time, and millions were watching. "My client has no comment," a voice boomed. A sharp-dressed lawyer had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. "This is all a misunderstanding that we'll clear up in court." But the damage was already done. On a nearby TV screen in the terminal, James watched in horror as the viral video played. The angle made him look even worse. His face twisted with rage as he grabbed Michelle's wrist, his mouth spewing words he now wished he could take back. Inside a small airport office, Michelle sat calmly giving her statement. Her wrist had been photographed and examined by a medical professional. The red marks were already turning into bruises, evidence that would be hard to explain away in court. "Miss Turner," a detective said gently, "you mentioned he'd been aggressive from the start of the flight." Michelle nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, he was triggered by not getting his preferred brand of scotch. But I've dealt with difficult passengers before. This was different. He wanted to hurt me, to humiliate me. You could see it in his eyes." In another room, James sat slumped between his expensive lawyer and the two air marshals. His jacket was off, his silk tie loose around his neck. He looked like a man watching his own funeral. "The videos are everywhere," his lawyer whispered, showing him his tablet. "Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Your firm's board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. And," he hesitated, "your wife's divorce lawyer just called." James put his head in his hands. Just hours ago, he'd been one of Wall Street's top traders. Now, he was about to become a different kind of trending topic. Racist executive faces federal charges. Back in the terminal, passengers from the flight were being interviewed. The judge had given a damning statement. The mother with the baby spoke about how frightened her child had been. Even the first-class passengers who usually minded their own business couldn't stay quiet. "He was a monster," said the businessman who tried to intervene. "Money doesn't give you the right to treat people like that." Michelle's union representative stood before a group of reporters, her voice firm. "This isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of abuse that flight crews face every day. Today, we're saying enough is enough." As James was led to a waiting police car, he caught one last glimpse of Michelle. She stood tall, surrounded by supportive colleagues, giving a statement to the press. She looked confident, professional. Everything he had failed to be. "I just want to set an example," she was saying, "for every flight attendant who's ever been afraid to speak up. Your safety matters. Your dignity matters. And no one, no matter how rich or powerful, has the right to take that away." The police car door shut with a final thud. As they drove away, James realized something. In first class, he'd always had a choice of drinks. But now, in jail, he'd be lucky to get water. And all because he couldn't handle hearing the word no. 3 months had passed since the infamous flight, but the aftermath was still sending shockwaves through James Whitmore IA's life. The marble-floored courthouse seemed to echo with whispers as he walked in, wearing a suit that no longer fit quite right after his time in holding. His lawyer had worked miracles, but even miracles couldn't erase the viral videos. Every news channel had played them on repeat. Wall Street EXAC's My Dare Melt Day One had become the year's most watched clip. Even his own children had seen it at school, coming home with tears and questions he couldn't answer. Today was Judgment Day. The courtroom was packed, reporters sketching furiously, social media influencers trying to sneak photos, and right in the front row, Michelle Turner, sitting straight-backed and confident in her airline uniform. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Martinez, not the same one from the plane, but one equally unimpressed by wealthy defendants, took her seat. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, shuffling through papers, "your actions that day weren't just an assault on Miss Turner. They were an assault on the basic rules that keep our society civil." James's life had already crumbled like a sandcastle in high tide. His firm hadn't even waited for the verdict. They'd asked for his resignation the day after the incident. His wife had changed the locks. His country club membership revoked. His children's private school had politely suggested alternative education options. "Your Honor," his lawyer stood up, "my client has shown genuine remorse. He's undergone anger management therapy, made substantial donations to flight attendant support organizations, bought with the same money he used to think he could buy immunity from consequences." Michelle's lawyer interrupted. The gallery murmured in agreement. Michelle took the stand next. She wasn't angry or vengeful. That made it worse somehow. She was simply professional. "I'm not here for revenge," she said clearly. "I'm here because the next flight attendant he encounters might not have air marshals to protect them." James watched his own hands trembling. His Rolex was gone, sold to pay legal fees. His signet ring, too. The judge's voice cut through his thoughts. "Stand up, Mr. Whitmore." He rose on shaky legs. The courtroom held its breath. "This court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, $50,000 in fines, and you are permanently banned from all commercial flights in the United States." The gavel cracked like thunder. "Perhaps this time will help you understand that true class has nothing to do with what's in your wallet." Cameras clicked furiously. Someone in the back whispered, "That's what you get." Another hissed, "Not long enough." As security led him away, James caught a final glimpse of Michelle. She was surrounded by other flight attendants, all in uniform, all standing tall. They weren't celebrating. They were simply nodding, as if justice had finally shown up for work. The TV crews outside would capture his final walk of shame. His lawyer was already talking appeals, but James wasn't listening. He was thinking about how a 15-minute temper tantrum at 35,000 feet, had cost him everything he'd spent 50 years building. In the parking lot, Michelle faced the media. "Today isn't about one man's punishment," she said firmly. "It's about every passenger understanding that kindness isn't optional. It's required for air travel, just like your ticket and ID." As James was driven away to begin his sentence, his phone buzzed one last time. It was his daughter. "Dad, when you get out, I hope you'll be someone I can be proud of again." 1 year had passed since that fateful flight. The viral video had faded from headlines, but its impact still rippled through the airline industry. Michelle Turner stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a room full of airline executives, union leaders, and government officials. "We're not just serving drinks," she said, her confidence filling the room. "We're keeping the skies safe. And today, thanks to the new Turner Act, we finally have the protection we deserve." The law, named after her, had changed everything. Assault on flight crew members now carried mandatory minimum sentences. Airlines had to provide better security training. A national database of banned passengers had been created. Meanwhile, in a minimum security federal prison in upstate New York, James Whitmore III sat in his cell, reading a letter from his teenage daughter. "Dad," it said, "I saw Ms. Turner on TV today. She didn't say anything bad about you. She just talked about making things better. Maybe you could learn from that." James looked different now. The designer suits were replaced by prison orange. His manicured nails were plain. His perfect haircut had grown out. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like wisdom. He'd spent his days writing apology letters. To Michelle, to his children, to every flight attendant he'd ever been rude to. Most went unanswered, but he kept writing. His therapist said it wasn't about getting responses. It was about becoming someone different. Back in the real world, Michelle's life had transformed too. Airlines were fighting to hire her as their safety consultant. She'd started a foundation helping flight attendants affected by passenger violence. Magazine covers called her the woman who changed the skies. The incident wasn't the end, she told a reporter. It was a beginning. Now flight attendants everywhere know they can stand up for themselves. Her phone buzzed. Another airline wanted her to train their crew. The morning news showed her latest safety video going viral, but for all the right reasons. Even Hollywood had called, wanting to make a movie about that day. James watched the same news report from his prison TV room. Other inmates gathered around, some recognizing him as that airline guy. He didn't mind anymore. His pride had cost him everything. His $30 million fortune now reduced to almost nothing. His reputation destroyed. His family scattered. But something unexpected had happened in prison. He'd started teaching other inmates about financial literacy. "Money doesn't make you better," he'd tell them. "I learned that at 35,000 feet. The final scene played out in an unexpected way. On the day of James's release, he found Michelle waiting outside the prison gates, not for revenge or gloating, but with an offer. "We're starting a program," she said, "teaching angry executives about respect and consequences. Would you like to help? Show them what it costs when you think money puts you above the law." James looked at her extended hand, the same one he grabbed so violently a year ago. This time, he shook it gently. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'd like that." They walked to her car, an unlikely pair, the flight attendant who'd become a national hero and the millionaire who'd lost everything to learn humility. Above them, planes crisscrossed the sky, carrying thousands of passengers and crew members who would never know how one terrible day had made their journeys safer. "You know what I learned?" James said, watching a plane overhead. "First class isn't about where you sit or what you drink." Michelle smiled. "It's about how you treat people." And somewhere high above, a flight attendant served drinks in first class, knowing that thanks to one brave woman and one humbled man, she could do her job without fear. Because sometimes the most important journeys aren't about where you're flying to. They're about who you become along the way.